Hello, everybody. This is the Kubernetes Conformance sub-project meeting for Tuesday, December 17th. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I believe right now the agenda consists of some things that Hippie and his team wanted to discuss. Let me bring up the doc just to be sure.
Thanks for hosting, John.
Oh, sure. So, all right. Why don't you guys just get started there?
Okay. First, we'll go through two different sections. The first is Zach has been working on a list, generating a list by querying our existing tests to find existing non-conformant tests that hit not only very few endpoints as a test, but those endpoints that they hit are hit by very few other tests. And the endpoints we're focusing on are the ones that are not yet hit by any conformance test. So hopefully a really good targeted non-Rube Goldberg machine list of tests. And so I'll kind of turn that over to Zach. And then a little after that, we've been working on our flow for making sure we understand what it means to test each of the endpoints. And a lot of this work has been with Devin and Caleb on cranking out not tests yet, but tickets that say, here is an unyet tested endpoint that we've chosen to work on. Here is an example test and evidence that the approach we took would increase coverage. I just wanted to get some feedback on both of these bodies of work before the end of the year. I think, Zach, would you like to share your screen?
Sure,
What's the best approach?
Yeah.
We may need to request the right access from the people. Oh, he's already got it.
Cool. So everyone can, is it a little small or can people see it all right?
I think it's good.
Fit the window.
Okay. Yeah, so essentially I just wanted to validate some of the investigation I was doing. And the idea was we want to increase conformance by increasing the, or promoting tests that would be valid for conformance. And to find those not just through, or to have kind of a rigorous way of finding ones that will be likely a highly likely to be a good candidate for promotion. And my hypothesis was that if a test is hitting an endpoint that is currently not hit by any other conformance tests, and that test is hitting a small amount, it means that it's focused towards what that endpoint is doing. And so it's getting closer to the behavior that we're trying to look at. And so likely the test is well written. So I can kind of show my process and work, and then this ends with the query and the results that I have from it. And then I was kind of seeking the feedback on whether or not the results just at a kind of glance seemed to be a like good handful, because then we can continually iterate and expand our filters, or if this is potentially the wrong path. But the audit event set that I'm using is one from yesterday. So just using the CI Kubernetes EDE, GCI, GCE, and that's what we'll be looking at through this. And so the first step that I did was just grab all of the EDE user agents from this audit event set. So there's 823, and we can do some simple string interpolation to break it down to just have our the test names. And with those, I then wanted to grab a count of the distinct endpoints that the tests are hitting. And so this is just using a Postgres filter but essentially, yeah, tallying every time a distinct endpoint is hit by a distinct user agent and grabbing the results here. And so we can see from here that the one test, the highest amount that they hit is 122, whereas on the low end, the low end is around 3. So yeah, there's a few tests there's like 4 tests that hit only 3 endpoints, and then it goes to 6 or 7. And from here, I did just some basic averaging to get a distribution of the total number of tests, the max endpoints hit by tests. At this point, I wanted to filter down even further. So now I'm only looking at when they're hitting stable endpoints, or ones that would be like in GA. And so here the distribution again is lowest is 3, highest is 80, and the average endpoints hit being around 14. You can do the same sort of logic then with the endpoints, where you're looking at how many distinct tests are hitting these endpoints, and similar distribution here. And here I just listed through all of them so we can get kind of a look at the pattern. And so it kind of follows that there would be some endpoints that are going to be hit by every test, just for discovery, but then we get into the nice single endpoint getting hit by just a few tests.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew that there was a good selection of these pairs likely. So from there, I could make these pairings of listing the focus tests and the endpoints that they hit, and listing the distinct endpoints and the tests that they hit. I'm not going to show these because it's going to give us a bunch of results. But essentially, it ends with a SQL query that looks a bit like this. But essentially, all we're doing is grabbing that selection of tests that I'd outlined before, grabbing that selection of endpoints that I'd outlined before, and then running this intersect, where I wanted the first scope to be pretty narrow. And so I'm saying, show me tests that are hit by, that are only hitting less than 5 endpoints, and show me the endpoints that are only getting hit by less than 5 tests, and show me where those 2 of them are combined. So the highly focused tests that are hitting the highly focused endpoints. At as narrow as 5, it only gives us actually 1 test that's hitting 1 endpoint. The test is a generated one, so it's, yeah, it shows up 4 times for the different versions, but it's all coming from the same protocol.go file in API machinery. And then I have the verified results within here, where I then just looked at each test individually to see which endpoints they hit, and looked at the endpoint itself to see which one it hit, and it's the what we would expect. So it's the ones that are only hitting 3 endpoints, including that list core v1 namespace service. So that is just a single, like, or one endpoint that could be made conformant by promoting this test, but I wanted to then expand the filter a little bit out. So in this case, I'm looking now at tests that are hitting less than 14 endpoints, if 14 was the average, and then endpoints that are getting hit by less than 5 tests. And this gets us to a slightly longer list. But as you can see, I can kind of play with those 2 filters to broaden our search or narrow our search. And the couple questions that I have now would be, like, I guess, yeah, just general feedback on this approach, on whether, if looking at this larger set of tests, just at a glance, if it does seem like these would be ones to look at further for seeing if they follow the promotion guidelines. Another question I had was around those numbers of what y'all would expect, how many, like the average, or like a good number to filter by for the number of tests that an endpoint is getting hit by, or the number of endpoints that a test is hitting. From here, the rest of the work was grabbing our conformance guideline and running through the steps one by one on a sample test to just start to check whether or not this particular test passes according to the guideline listed in our repo.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so it looks like a thorough approach, like a way to find, I guess, things that are likely to be able to be promoted without, hopefully without too much pain. Obviously, it's not necessarily going to identify the things that are most critical to promote, but that's okay. We need both, I guess. So in that sense, I think the approach looks great. I mean, it's methodical and identifies things that otherwise we probably wouldn't see. It would be, of course, up to the individual SIGs to know, to identify whether that's a appropriate test, like tests what it says it tests and that sort of thing. Yeah, I like it. That's great. It's great.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. So I think probably from here I would be grabbing those samples and making the list that you see below, but at this point reaching out to, because yeah, there's a number of things that you can kind of see just by looking through the code, but some of those guidelines I would need the SIG domain like expert help.
Right.
But this is a good start to get that. Cool. Thank you.
Right. And then, it comes down to at some point, like whether we think these, should be part of conformance, and but that's a separate question than whether the test is. I think you're doing everything you can to determine that we meet all the stuff we can before we make that decision, I guess. So that looks good. Okay, excellent, nice.
Yeah, thank you.
As far as a threshold number, I don't have any way to say what a reasonable threshold is personally. I don't know if anybody else has an opinion on that. I think it's going to be discovered through exploring it like that.
It'll be pushback on Rube Goldberg machine this, and that's not yet a hard metric.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, sometimes it may turn out that you look at that and you say, okay, I can split off this piece of this test and make it its own test, and then it's not Rube Goldberg anymore, but you still used it to identify something useful.
We'll follow up on this test promotion review process by going ahead and identifying those internally as far as with an eye, the ones that look really by pass-through valid for promotion, and then get the SIGs involved to get their thoughts on whether it's conformance, and then that last part, of course, will flow through the approval process internally or for within the conformance office hours and SIG Arch process. That was the first section, was the test promotion review, because we initially started out with the kind of an unsorted list, and this kind of prioritizes it based on non-Rube Goldbergianness.
Right, exactly. That's one. And I mean, I think what we're working through, Jeffrey and I, is that behavior stuff. And like I saw, one of these is pod readiness gates, right? And that was one of the easy behaviors to write down. So like that one will be, we'll get a better punch list out of that as well. But that doesn't sort of, there's sort of two things. There's the new test we want to write, and then there's the identifying existing tests that already cover things that we just want to promote. And this is really helpful for the latter part.
Woo-hoo. The next section of what we were wanting to go through from the IA perspective is rather than writing tests and getting a lot of this test isn't up to snuff yet, we went ahead and were writing tickets that showed how we identified a particular endpoint to focus on, look at the documentation for that, and wanted to get approval from the right SIGs before we get to the point of even writing a test. This is the workflow we've kind of identified as we think is useful, but we'd like to get feedback from we're not getting any feedback.
Right. Okay.
This is on ticket level before to it. So I figured if we go through this list, we can say the approach is wrong or some other things.
So for one, we probably need to move these as you do them. They should go into the project board.
Yeah.
And those of us who are reviewing the project board should probably be more diligent about reviewing the project board. I've had a tendency to look at the right-hand side of the project board and not the left-hand side. And, so, but I see like this one, I just clicked on one randomly. It's not in the project board. So
as far as
process, that's probably where these things should start.
Okay.
And then we can go through them now, or we can, I don't know what the best.
I think as far as like showing the team as well as the process, if you want to go ahead, or either you can share your screen or I can try to share my screen, and we go through adding these individual tickets to the board.
Sure.
Before, and then we can kind of go through them, as I expect these calls should possibly go in the future, where we do use the board as the once we go through our AIs and short notes, this focus on reviewing.
Whoa, I just upgraded my Mac OS, and now like the sharing, I'm not sure it's working. Let's see.
I can give it a go if it gets to be too.
I just have to go through some security settings.
Yes, share all the things.
Share all the things with everybody who wants to. Okay. Zoom, allow Zoom to share screen. Oh man, I would have to quit and restart, and that would stop the recording. So
yeah, all right.
Somebody else can try to share.
I'm going to share my conformance meeting window. I may reshape it so that it fits better with the display size. So at the top level of our conformance office meeting notes, if you want to know where to go, we have a project board. And so I'm going to open that project board in another window, and we'll go back and forth between here. So our two triage, I feel like
I think if you guys are adding these, right, you're closely involved in this process. You can probably move it a little further along than to triage. But it also needs to get assigned to a reviewer. So the idea would be that anything that goes in here, I don't think we have tool. Was Srini or somebody was working on tooling for this, weren't they?
We did, and I think the priority went down on it somewhere. So can I just add an issue, and that becomes beautiful?
That's how you do it. Or if you see where it says add cards, if you click on that, it'll just pull up a list in the upper. Yep.
Cards.
You can filter it however you want. So you could say, for example, author or.
Yeah, why don't we do author? Because Bobby McBobs has been our primary writer. Thinks it is open. Author is Bobby McBobs. All right, so that's right coverage.
And you can just drag them over.
All right, well, let's drag them into the. I must already be in there somewhere.
I think when you added something with that little add note, that did not do what you wanted it to do.
Okay, we'll go back. Where did that add?
Anyway, we'll go backward. But yeah, if they go in here, but and there's a set of people who are reviewers for conformance who are supposed to be going through that board on a regular basis. I think that tooling would certainly did it work the way you
I think it does if I edit that way, because most of our new ones are research. If you look at that, that looks like a normal card.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's more in line.
Since the link, I guess GitHub's smart enough to actually figure it out.
Go back to our add another. And I think area conformance, we've already added area conformance, which was our primary ask before, but I think people are just looking for PRs, and we moved away from doing just the PRs.
Right.
We got just a few more to add. Is that this one and then this one? And I think 2 more. This one. And again, these are already in the project, so we'll let you add it. That's good. And here's our big +5 coverage. We'll prioritize that one.
Nice. So the question is, let's see, we'll see who's listed in the reviewers.
Right, so most of these are core, right? So they're going to be core component, core service status, and pod template we were bringing back because it's not deprecated. There's people depending on it, at least.
Yeah, no, we're leaving that, but we're not going to make it conformance. So here's who we have in reviewers right now, and we need to expand this list. So we have Brian, Clayton, Aaron, Tim, Sinclair, Dims, and me. And so I think that's.
This is pre them. This is just, it's actually down, they're more of the gate for hitting conformance.txt or reviewing, or did you feel that?
Yes and no. So there's reviewers and approvers there. So the gate are the approvers, and that's at this point me and Tim and not Tim, Ian, Clayton, and Brian. So we need a pool of people who are willing to review this, just like we have API reviewers and we have like tens of them. We need, if we're going to have a lot of these, we need enough people and some tooling that will assign these to get them into the condition they need to be prior to going to that gate. And subsequent to the behavior switchover, so after that, in fact, reviewers will be, there'll be a third set of people who are approvers of tests, but not approvers of behaviors. So that is, we've already determined the behaviors that are conformant. And then there's this tests the behaviors it says it tests and meets all of those criteria that you were going through there. And so that's going to be a bigger set of approvers, I hope, than just a few people who do approval for behaviors.
I feel if we were to look where we're currently at, this list that the sort of backlog for these issues is like the behavior. Is this an accurate behavior? Yes, it focuses on an endpoint, and yes, it's like what a test might look like, but it's not the test. It's a very verbose description of the behavior. And so that's where I'm wondering if we want to start that list of behavior reviewers now. I think
the behavior approvers is going to be a very small list, right? That's going to be the list of what was conformance approvers right now. It already is. It's me and Clayton and Brian, because that's the actual thing that matters. Like all the tests, functionally the tests matter, but like as far as like, if it comes to a head in the conformance program, the thing that actually matters is the list of behaviors, not the list of tests. In the sense of like, you can call it Kubernetes or not. And so that's a very high.
Yes, it's a small list. And I'm
happy to look through these, right? But it wouldn't be final approval, but just to say, yes, this is a valuable test, or this is something that's likely to be one of those behaviors. And there's no reason why, if it meets all the criteria that we defined, and it's not optional GA, there's no reason to think it wouldn't be approved as a behavior. But that's, sometimes there's subtle things in there that we don't realize till later, right? Like the metrics and auto scaling piece and all that.
Let me go ahead and close out the thing so we can maybe go through a flow that we might normally do in a meeting. And I'll just click on the first sorted backlog and say, do we want to move this to in progress? This is going to hit a lot of namespaced events, basically read, patch, list for namespace, all namespaces, and delete and create. The process followed was deploy API Snoop, select stuff related to namespace. So those are the eight or 5 endpoints. These are the documentation we went to look at, and here's our example in Go. So this isn't in EDE framework, but this is in Go. It's just so we can really quickly mock up what the test might look like.
Okay, so it sends an event. Make sure it got the event it sent, something like that.
Yep. The write-up up top, it creates an event with custom fields. It lists the event in all namespaces to find the event, and the response for this, update the contents. We do a modify, get the event, make sure that it's modified, delete it, and then list it in all namespaces to make sure that it was actually deleted.
Yeah, I mean, this looks great, right? It covers a bunch of core event functionality. We can't, and you know, depend on, one of the things is we don't want to depend on specific events for other tests of content. Maybe here you're testing the eventing infrastructure. That makes sense.
With our flow, what we've been doing is after we evaluate this this example test, we go through and query API Snoop live in the cluster and make sure that this was actually hit to increase our coverage. This metric will show up, and our metric for this one is this will give us 5 new endpoints, the 5 endpoints listed up there. And that's kind of the iteration we can really quickly go, yep, we need to move that. That's going to stay in the sort of backlog on top, and that way somebody can grab it from the top. We may want to modify it or approve, or maybe if we want to put a comment down here. I'm not sure what because we don't do this around tickets, but approve a ticket. for
Right. Well, it's sort of like approving this makes sense to move forward with.
Yeah.
I mean, you can LGTM without the slash, right? Just
LGTM according to the the SIG Arch Conformance office hours. What's today's date? 17th of December. Yeah. So, well, I'll copy that into my thing. Maybe there's a tag or something we could do as well, so we can not look at that next time in the sorted backlog because it just hasn't been picked up.
Well, yeah, or we could put them all into the T2 triage and move them into sorted backlog as they reach the point of ready to pick up and do something about. Right. This was I think that the
yeah, you're right. So
project
we'll
board
kind of agreed. Triage is the better place for that. I'll move these over real quick, so they're in the back of the two triage area. And
then, you know, if it's in the sort of backlog, you can pick it up and start working on it.
That's correct. So we got a good, decent number of them here. Identify. This is it's got a lot of people on it. I'll leave that one over here in the sorted backlog. I think that's it. There's our +5. So this next one is write list v1 core service. So this is list core service for all namespaces, just a single endpoint. You went and found the docs. Here's a really simple test. Let's see what it does here. Where's the services? So it does list services.
This wasn't hit by anything?
I know, isn't it? Isn't it crazy? I think it's because it's in all namespaces.
Oh.
And all of our tests focus on scoped stuff.
I see.
There's not a whole lot to test. It's pretty simple, and we just
Yeah.
need to add if there's any specifics we want to do to it. But otherwise, be sure to list, and we're always going to have stuff in a cluster when you list all namespaces.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's more intense logic you want to add to that test, but
I don't see why we would.
yeah,
I mean,
we'll pull that over into the sorted backlog underneath our more valuable one.
I mean,
Here is one for creating. Oh, sorry. Yeah, our promotion process is sticking it into the sorted backlog. So this one is read service status. And a lot of these, it was hard to hit the endpoint manually. I don't know if they, like this one is under get options. So the main client, the call is here. And we're looking in the default namespace. And I'm not sure if that's the right space for us to be looking for namespace service status, or if we should be looking in.
well, names-based service status. So that's referring to just the status sub-resource
Yep.
of a service that's in a namespace.
Yeah.
Or what? Okay. It doesn't matter. I mean, do you create one for the purpose of?
No, there's not a need to create one. There will be some services already available in a namespace. And I'm trying to figure out which one, do we want to create one? Or
How do we know one will be available when the test runs? You're just saying there's in previous tests it will have been created.
I'm thinking the Kubernetes, like DNS, will have been deployed, and I don't know if we should. We could. I think maybe we should create one. To be honest.
I mean, you're right that we actually do require we have DNS tests as part of conformance. So you're right that the DNS.
Oh,
Well, it doesn't actually have to have a service created for it. It could be just, in theory, it could actually
somewhere behind the provider service mesh that doesn't appear in the pods or in the
well,
service list.
DNS in particular is just an IP address, right? I mean, that's
Might be good to create a service and then check its status.
Yeah.
My feedback on that, like our feedback. But otherwise, it seems like a decent test. I'll go back up to one more time. That's the JavaScript. We have
the one service there is a service we require to be present, and that is Kubernetes.default.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Or use Kubernetes service default.
It's just Kubernetes.default. SVC.
All right, the service is required.
Pretty sure
it's already using Kubernetes.default. If you look up.
Oh, is that what it was doing?
Yep.
All right. For the feedback.
Okay.
If you have a look at the SVC object.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay.
Give me the Kubernetes default
Yes.
service.
I believe we require that to exist because I think we used that. I think we implicitly require that to exist because I think we used it in the DNS in the service name tests that we reworked when we were doing the Windows DNS tweaks and stuff like that. And we implemented service looking at the actual service data plane layer. I believe we required that one to exist, and nobody's bitched about it yet. Excuse my language.
All right. I think it's good for the backlog. I'll go ahead and make a call on that. And then our next one is write patch. So patch namespace. Patch namespace.
Okay, patch namespace.
And we look at the selection and has, the path and things, and our example, and I know it's writing all those examples in Go.
what are we patching? What do we change?
I'm looking now.
Label.
This test patches the label, where is it? In the object meta part of the namespace, it adds a new label and then verifies that that has been added.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else in the namespace to patch, right?
No, yeah, pretty plain, I suppose.
Okay, that seems quite reasonable.
All right.
Definitely
Pat,
be on board with that. So it's interesting to list all namespaces one. I was thinking about it like, in fact, that's an interesting one to be conformance, because one of the things we would want to test, one of the places you could run into problems is if somebody decided they built an API server that was sharded across namespaces. And so that actually is something that I could potentially see causing a problem in some particular implementation. So we want it, right? That means we want the test.
Yay.
do we want to, for that particular use case, for example, do we want to test and make sure, like, is there a way to verify that instead of just, I think right now we're just looking for a service that's in all the namespaces.
You're
Maybe
looking for a service that's in any namespace, you're saying. There's not, yeah, you're right. That, yeah, okay. There's almost no way to test that because we don't know what their sharding key would be. So
Right.
we could create a bunch of services with different names in different namespaces and see that they all come back. But that's just like a scattershot approach.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting when we get down to how do we test some of the dependencies on etcd that were kind of required, but not like the stuff like for K3s and stuff.
Yeah, we don't want dependencies on etcd, right? We want.
Yeah.
We don't want accidental. We don't want accidental behaviors from.
Yeah, I think.
I have not
identify what those are and how to test for them will definitely be insightful. Our next one is list core something. What is this one? List component statuses. We found that a lot of the code doesn't yet hit the statuses endpoint. Hence I said, well, just hit, this sounds like a good pattern. Go find the one where we hit the statuses or get status directly.
What is component? I don't even know what component is.
components are the things running in the, well, it's like API server and
I didn't realize we called those. Okay, I didn't realize we had.
yeah, I didn't even know what they were, but now I do, kind of.
kubectl, what's the command? It's kubectl cluster stack.
Hang on, do you want me just, I'll just get the raw API path and then we can do that.
Oh yeah, it's going to be here in the selection, right?
Likely.
Here, the API path
Perfect,
is
thank you.
component statuses, and the component statuses names. There's a list and the component statuses.
Such
Either
components
just separate
include.
statuses, or we have actually is this a sub resource of some sort of component resource, or this is a separate component status as a resource for monitoring or something? Okay, we don't have to know right now.
By the way, the components include scheduler, controller manager, and etcd as examples, to name a few. Yeah.
Right, but we can't specifically rely on any individual ones of those. But it doesn't look like you are. You're just getting them all.
That's right.
I don't know about this one. We better look into this more because this may well not even be necessary to have anything in there in a given group. Imagine I completely subsume the cluster components into my infrastructure and don't expose them to my end users. I can still meet the basic Kubernetes API functional requirements. So this one I'm skeptical about whether this should be part of conformance.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
okay,
not positive. This also
know.
sounds like one of those things that you can turn off, and maybe that's those individual things that go in there as a component status, but like for security reasons,
Right.
I know the kubelet just turns off reporting statuses of some things.
So if you want to, you could assign this to me to research further. I'd be happy to do that.
Form want them to due to not
Optional. Probably maybe optional.
doing the due to being optional. I'd love to see where we document that, but I'll go ahead and.
I don't know that it is documented, right?
Yeah, this is something we should. But I'm going to go ahead and.
I don't even know that, but yeah, send it to me. Yeah.
I don't like the word conformant. It's not a.
It's not a word, apparently.
It's not a word. We keep using it all the time.
Conforming is actually probably the right word. Damn English.
Right, list core. Did we already move on to that one? I'm going to go through the list, so I'm doing it in order off the board so we don't miss something. So this one's going to stay into triage. And now we're going to do the next one, research for core pod status. There's nothing written for core pod status. And our main's a little bit longer.
People must, they hit the, because it's the sub resource, is that the issue or?
Yeah.
I think that there might have been something with this particular endpoint in client Go whilst trying to hit it. I think I remember it's probably at the bottom of the issue, but I think there might have been difficulty hitting the status part because yeah, there we go. In client Go, we weren't actually able to reach that particular part of the endpoint, only API v1 namespace, then the namespace pod, then the name was available.
It's inside the JSON response for pod name. And then
right, because it's a sub resource. So when you do a get, it gets the whole thing. It doesn't
Yeah,
hit
that's
that.
correct.
So this came up recently. Somebody was asking about the same thing. You can use the dynamic client for this.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what Python and JavaScript do as well, because we were able to do, you didn't include the JavaScript, but
there's a Python one below.
Because Python and JavaScript both kind of compile and generate dynamically their client implementation, all endpoints are available to access from those languages. So often, or as we've been experimenting with, we've been using Python and JavaScript as well and just exploring the approach.
Right.
But obviously to get it into our current ED framework, we've got to get it into Go world, which has its own ecosystem. And it's kind of a bit closely tied to the Kubernetes implementation, which I wonder if there's a future.
You should be able to use dynamic client to hit that directly. There was recently an issue that went out. Somebody was asking about that for disruption budgets, I think. And so if you search for that issue, which should be like, it's like pod disruption budgets to GA. I think Jordan may have pointed people to more specific, or he may have just said use the dynamic client. I don't know.
All right. Yep. We'll do that, and we'll go ahead and move that from to triage into somewhere in the somewhat sorted backlog. And now we've got
You just moved
this
this
one you just mentioned. No,
Chris, you moved the wrong one.
I moved the wrong one. Thanks for the eyes on that. Which one?
You moved the +2 coverage over when you intended to move the read core v1 pod namespace pod status.
The top one.
Yep.
Ah. Okay. I think this is where we're getting to the end of the stuff that we went ahead and created issue templates for. This last one is the
pod template. I don't make that conformant.
I want metadata on the ones where we make this call. We have no way of like why, and we don't have a place.
Well, there's the issue, right? There's the
somewhere in the history there's an issue. Go find that one. That's why that.
Yeah, exactly. Come on, there's only like 100,000 of them. You should be able to find it easily.
Bible history of knowledge. It's in the scrolls.
I mean, maybe. in some sense, the reason that this is coming up is because we're backfilling. We're backfilling, we're reverse engineering the specification from the system. And so, to repeat myself ad nauseum, the behavior stuff is supposed to turn that around the other way, right? We're supposed to provide the specification prior to the, I mean, we're still doing it backwards, but or at least deciding ahead of time what conformant. So this wouldn't be a question. If it wasn't in the list of behaviors, it wouldn't be on the punch list kind of thing, unless somebody wanted to propose it as a conformant thing, and then there'd be a sort of different process. So, right, I just think, I don't know that we need any more like way to tag metadata and API schema for this or anything. I think we just have to, it's going to be tribal knowledge until we've reversed the flow that we're using.
Okay. On that note, we've gone through our two main items of, here are things we could prioritize on promoting, and here is our current now prioritized list of test writing. Is there anything, John, that we can help you and Jeff with the the work you're doing on behaviors?
So Jeffrey's got a Jeffrey, did you share that document? We might have to move it to your personal Gmail to share it. Although we could share it with the Kubernetes dev. I'll take a look at it. Jeff has a document that kind of describes it, and yeah, okay, he'll share it, and
awesome.
You can review, and it talks a little bit about more the nuts and bolts of what he's working on, as opposed to the floofy high level stuff I talk about. So
looking forward to helping with that then.
Okay.
We'll get that by our New Year meeting. When's our next meeting? Like December, January 15th-ish?
I don't know. I have to check calendar.
It's been a good year. We've made some progress.
Made some progress. You know, it'll be nice to. Yes, we made some progress.
Yeah, it'll be on the 15th.
Okay.
Well,
okay.
I'll turn it back over to you, John. Thank you.
I don't have any. This was great. No, this is awesome. This is real progress. Thank you. It's looking really good. And does anybody else have anything before we adjourn?
Yeah, a couple of small things. Since they're conformance related, I put there something regarding the image promoter, since it's something that we must have, since we might update images and we still actually do, and it's a good idea to have an automatic process to do that. So in order to actually have an image promoter, there were 3 requests required. The first one merged, as it's written there. The second one is been approved, but it's waiting for the third one to merge. And the third one is still not yet approved. Basically, it creates a cloud config.yaml, which is then used by the image builder. The other thing that this adds is the ability to build all images in one shot by modifying a bit the image util script in the Kubernetes test images. Now, the issue that I kind of have is that it takes a long time to build all the images. Even only building all the images, having them already cached and without having to push them, it takes me 36 minutes with only Linux images to do all that. While currently the timeout is at 50 minutes. So most probably it's gonna time out the image building process. And I was thinking that since some images are taking extremely long times to build, we could exclude them, at least for the time being. Something like the volume tests or the pets images and so on. volume images and path images. Or alternatively, we could only build the conformance tests first, the conformance images first, like the Agnost or the test web server or the Kitten or the Nautilus images and so on. So I am looking for some ideas or feedback.
I like the idea of separating out the conformance images into its own job, just for splitting the time. If you split the jobs up into the building of the images in multiple jobs, you also decrease your build time overall. If there's reasonable points of, I don't think we need one big, huge build all the images job.
Yeah, the reason why I'm also raising the timeout limit is because in the second part, we actually want to have those Windows images also built for the test images. And in that regard, I already had the pull request, you probably know it, which adds Windows support to the Kubernetes test images. It's been reviewed quite a bit, and I've also we already also created a resource group in Azure that contains Windows Server 1909, 1903, 1909, which can be used by the image promoter in the near future. So basically, they've been configured with installed with Docker, and Docker has been configured to allow remote connections using some certificates that I can pass along to someone who can put them in the image promoter. In regards to the steps that would be required to do this, basically, I will have to pass to some of the certificates that someone has to put them inside a secret or something. Then the secret will have to be mounted inside the pro job or the Linux pod or host that builds the images. And finally, a couple of extra environment variables will have to be added to the job, which I've pasted in the conformance meeting document. So basically, as far as the image promoter goes, it's just a few items to complete, which shouldn't really take a long time. Just maybe have to just limit the image building to the conformance images. And then finally, we can start merging the Windows support pull request and including the secret and those changes inside the promoter. There's also a discussion on Slack regarding that. It's the last line. I've been discussing this with Feta.
So what is the rationale for, like, I'm not familiar with all this stuff, so I need to look into it before I have any real opinion. But what I'm trying to understand is the when you say just the images used for conformance, I mean, why? Like, what is our reasoning behind that conformance gets to be done first, and do we think it's
the main issue was the build time. It takes an extremely long time to build all the images, a couple of hours at least. So at the first iteration, I was thinking to just build the conformance images, which are commonly used in conformance testing, like the Agnost image.
Getting back to the goal. So the goal here is just that as we build out these conformance tests, we want to be able to change the images more quickly. Like, what is the is it because of the Windows? We want to be able to add the Windows images in, and or don't we run other end-to-end tests against Windows? So this is where I'm not like, I'm not following. Don't we have other Windows images other than the conformance ones? Like, what is the reason beyond splitting the job in some way to make it to take less time? Is it that we think the conformance images are changing more quickly? Is that the issue? And or
yeah, typically. I've taken a look on those images, and the ones that are not commonly used in conformance tests, some of them haven't been changed since 8 months ago, for example.
and our
Like,
builds aren't smart enough to not bother building them, is what
yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, to me, that would be the more interesting problem to address is if an image, if I mean, it's hard to say maybe, but it's maybe a harder problem. But, you know, if there's no reason to think the image has changed, then I'm not sure why we should even rebuild them again anyway. But that's a very difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
I see Patrick's feedback just here recently, like 32 minutes ago. And it seems like the right approach is to, most of this is the architecture underpinning it within testing. And as far as like what we can provide on this call is trying to make sure that as we are writing Windows tests, start utilizing those images more. I don't know that we can give a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, certainly up to the testing info for people, but and so you're saying,
Patrick's.
yeah, I guess you're saying we'd have a target that's instead of all images, it's conformance images, essentially.
Yeah, we could also do that.
That might be, I don't know, fit better into the, I don't know. I don't know this infrastructure particularly well. So, like I said, don't have much of an opinion at this point.
So I guess the two things I wanted to hear your opinion on was like, I think keeping all the images consistent across architecture and OS is important, and that's one of the goals of Image Promoter. And so if we could actually be able to validate, like, does this SIG review changes to images used in conformance today, or are those just fanned out across different SIGs to review?
They mostly will, I mean, so we have this sort of, we're out of time, but we have this sort of problem of, like, we actually can't always detect when some change has been made to some test that could implicitly have an effect on conformance.
Mm-hmm.
Jeffrey and I were talking about this yesterday. And that would be one way, right? Images could change. People could change things inside a test that is a conformance test. People could change things inside a function that's called by a conformance test.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have any way of knowing about, so we just kind of have to live with that pain and the trust of our community to flag those things whenever we can. So we have reviewed when a lot of the Windows things and moving things to the agnostic container, whatever it is, in order to allow tests that were only working in Linux to also work in Windows and things like that. And so when they sort of impact the conformance tests in that way, we definitely want to see them and certainly are willing to help out in any way we can to make sure that we can have one test that runs on all the different platforms and especially when it's a conformance test. But no, we don't review every change to every image that potentially affects conformance unless somebody flags it for us, because we have no way of knowing about it. Theoretically, people should flag those to us, but I can't believe they did.
Okay. So what I'm getting is you're willing to review conformance related image changes once they're flagged. You support the general principle of building all of these for all the OSs and all the architectures all at once, but it's up to kind of test infra to make the final decisions on how this gets implemented.
Yeah, and if there's and if we want to have a talk with them, you know, I'm open to that too. If you have if there's somewhere I can add value, I'm happy to add value, but I'm not sure that there is.
Okay. sorry.
I got to get out. I'm being
Yeah.
out of the room here.
Okay.
All right. Thank you all.
Good, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next year. Happy
All
holidays.
right. Happy New Year.
See ya.